Hello everyone, and welcome to the webinar series at the Center for Professional Selling at Ball State University. My name is Deva Rangarajan and I'm the Director for the Center for Professional Selling, and it is my absolute pleasure to have Mr. David Gorsuch, who's actually going to share some of his insights on coaching. David, thank you so much for...
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. David, if you could just briefly introduce yourself, what is it that you do? That'd be great.
Sure, David Gorsuch, and I'm actually a finance grad, but evolved into coaching.
Right.
And I'll say performance coaching, because there's different types of coaching, but performance coaching, I've been doing that for about 20 years. You know, lived in Indianapolis most of my life. I have clients pretty much all over the world, actually, now, with the way technology is.
Absolutely.
But it's, you know, this is something I'm glad to have been invited in, because this is something that is very passionate for me, and of course centered to my heart in helping to share some of these concepts with others.
Absolutely, and I think, David, beyond the fact that you're a coach and do everything else, that I know that you've come and helped us out in judging some of our sales competitions. So we're really thankful for that and really appreciate the time. I know that you have clients all over the place, so that for you to take time to come and talk to us, it's absolutely fantastic.
Well, I appreciate it. No.
And actually you touched on the topic that I think is something that a lot of people in sales management tend to forget, is how important coaching is for actually managing your sales team as well. And actually here's a number that I actually had from a company called ZS Associates, one of the largest sales consulting companies. And they mentioned that close to $800 billion is being spent on the sales force in the US alone, on salaries and everything else.
Right.
Now, to what extent do you think that if I'm a sales manager and I'm spending a lot of money on my sales team, or a sales leader, what are the different tools that I have to actually go out there and increase the performance of the salespeople?
Great question. You know, I think it starts with really the hiring process. I know that the human resources departments have worked very well with a lot of the sales departments, marketing departments, but in this case sales departments, on using different types of assessment tools to really get a better feel of, you know, everybody's a rock star on paper or the resume, but when they have the opportunity to take an assessment tool that's validated, be able to have a conversation around the actual results of that, that's a very important tool for a lot of sales managers. I think also with just the different multitude of CRM packages, how does a sales manager help keep a pulse on sales teams, sales individuals, territories? They can look at trends, you know, that, you know, stack rankings, they can look at pipeline. I mean, so there's a lot of data that's available to sales managers today. And of course, the great segue to that is, but how do you use some of that data?
Absolutely, absolutely. For me, that's the whole point, because you mentioned something about recruitment, and I think that's something at our sales center we're trying to prepare the students to actually go into a career in sales. But despite that, a large part of that is the fact that once they go into an organization, if they don't have the right kind of managers helping them through the process, helping them understand what the sales process looks like, how they should be looking at kind of conducting themselves, trying to bring in business. And of course, this goes on throughout their careers, right? So it's not just when they recruit them, but later on as they progress in their professional life and their personal life, that the CRM packages that you talk about, and it's data that you get. But the question then becomes is, how do sales managers use that? So if I understand you correct, or if I'm paraphrasing you right, that coaching is going to be a big part after you've recruited the people. Is that correct?
Well, here's what I will tell you, you know, and to be very transparent about how the industry is evolving and accepting or engaging a coaching element. I mean, let's face it, you know, there's a lot of sales executives, sales and marketing executives of my age that are still thinking, I hired this sales manager to do that job. And I think it's, although that generation of sales managers, if you will, they're more aware of those opportunities for outside resources and consulting or coaching. You know, sometimes they're running into some resistance of upper level management in that. So I guess it's really a cultural element trend that we need to first of all identify, you know, the place for coaching. There's always going to be a place. I mean, let's face it, some of your top athletes, not just on the coaching of the team, but they have sought out, whether it be a Michael Jordan, you know, you could go on from Carson Wentz, I mean, some modern day athletes that have coaches, performance coaches, to assist them, even though they're elite athletes, because they recognize today it's no longer good enough to be great. You have to be extraordinary. And those little gaps of closing is where performance coaching comes in.
Absolutely. And it's very interesting that you talk about this, because what you're saying, if I'm hearing you correct, is you need coaching at various levels.
Yes.
You need your sales managers to be coaching their sales teams, but the sales managers themselves need coaching by the sales directors, in case that's the hierarchy that they have. And the sales directors themselves need to be coached by people. And again, it goes all the way. So essentially, the term is, if I want to be very parochial, it's sales coaching, but the idea is that you need performance coaching at all levels. Correct. Is that correct?
Yes, but I guess to where I hear what you're talking, there's still a gap out there of coaching the coach.
Yeah.
I see the sales manager as the internal coach.
Yeah.
And then the external consultant being the coach of that coach. How do we gain greater impact? How do we gain greater traction with this team? As you alluded to, the cost of a hire is enormous today.
Indeed.
And so how do we get the return on that investment more rapidly? You know, this is where they need to be armed with that. How do I coach the coach, and how does that coach understand how to engage their staff,
Absolutely.
or their people?
It's very interesting. So in your opinion, do you think that, let's say, for example, you have an internal coach, that's a sales manager, but I completely see, do you think that it makes sense for organizations to consider somebody not involved in the daily activities, actually to bring a different perspective, so that they can act as somebody that a salesperson can turn to for matters just beyond numbers that you have?
Well, here's what I would say. Let's break it down even further. You know, what is coaching then, whether as performance coaching? It's really about understanding, first of all, what is the ideal of the team, and then what is the ideal of the individual. You know, we all have an ideal of performing at a high level, but then there's reality. So the sales manager will attempt to close that gap of reality by utilizing the tools that we talked about, but they only typically work within behavior and skills and knowledge. So what's missing is, in performance, higher levels of performance, is beliefs. And that's where very few of sales managers or companies are equipped to understand what are the belief systems that are hindering a person from performing at a higher level. We keep trying to say, well, if you just did more of this or gained more knowledge of this and we're better, that's only 2/3 of the challenge. The bigger third is the belief system.
Absolutely. And I think it's very interesting that you raise this, because the more you were saying this, in my picture, I'm imagining that a sales manager is talking from his or her perspective of what is important within their own organization, but they're not necessarily taking a step back and saying, overall, what are the things that we want them to achieve, and having somebody from outside coming in and telling them this is what it is. That's the belief structure, and that's going to change, right? You need a belief structure change at the sales manager level, saying we need to bring somebody from outside. We need to have the same level at different levels. So I think it's very interesting you talk about this. But one of the things we hear constantly, that's when we talk to a lot of salespeople, is the fact that they mention that they have various kind of experiences with sales managers coaching them, right? In your experience, given how much you believe in the aspect of coaching, do you actually see sales managers and management? So now I'm going to not restrict just sales management, but also high levels. Do they spend adequate amount of time coaching and putting resources into it?
Well, I think they try. I mean, they have the best interest of their people. And you know, they read books or they may attend seminars, but coaching for transformation and to gain higher levels of impact and performance is a process. And that's a constant engaging process, because it's as I say, to close the gap from reality to the ideal, it cannot be done in a short period of time, but it has to be very strategically mapped out. And unfortunately, in today's business world, you know, they're pushed to get the results quicker, and so they tend to leave those things behind. But that's where frustration and challenges come in performance, because they're not connecting with that person that needs more some belief understanding than behavior challenges, or go attend this seminar and get better at doing this sales closing or this sales presentation.
But it's interesting you talk about this, because when you say we need to be strategic about this, right? Now, what you're then trying to tell me is that if I have to go convince my boss, for example, about, hey, why we need to be coaching our people, of course, the first thing the boss is going to say is that, hey, what is it going to cost me? And how is this going to be structured? I do not want to take my people off the field because that's lost opportunities. So is there a kind of a building block structure? So
Great question.
these are the building blocks of an effective training program, and then how would you try to explain them?
Yes. Well, first of all, not everybody is coachable. So the idea, first of all, is let's make sure we're spending money on people or situations that are coachable. So we look at desire, commitment, humility, decisiveness, meaning does the person have a true desire to want to get better? And of course everybody says they do, but then commitment level, where is that commitment level? And everybody is 100% committed until. There's always an until for each person. The idea is to identify where that until is. And is that person willing to break through? Humility. I mean, this is where we find the greatest challenges, of course, because if you have a young, energetic male or female sales manager, they're feeling good because they've been promoted into this. They feel like they have to have all the answers, but humility is about accepting that you don't have all the answers. And that some of the answers you have are not the accurate answers or approach. And then decisiveness, just meaning this goes more to the executive level, the decision-making capacity. So, okay, if we identify, do they really make the decision to want to change? So that's the foundation is desire, commitment, humility, and decisiveness. The next level is just identifying where are the broken pieces within this process. One of the things we haven't touched on is, and you're not going to get in any performance assessment, or a DISC profile, a predictive index, some of the tools that are used in hiring, they're not going to reveal the 5 hidden weaknesses that we all technically have when it comes to executing in sales. Emotional involvement, need for approval, low money tolerance. We also have non-supportive buy cycles, people that would sell in a transaction because that's the way they are versus a longer term of relationship selling. So identifying where these pieces come together to determine what's the process for coaching is where this starts.
Indeed. So if I understand you correct, is that the building blocks begins with an estimation of where is the person, what are their profiles, do they have all the things that you talked about? And I love the concept of humility because the next webinar we're going to be doing on is about humility in salespeople. And of course, the people are they coachable? Now, once you do that, of course, the next step is, okay, let's take a look at the sales process and see the fit between the sales process and that individual and where the gaps are. Now, on top of that, are there anything else that you would do? Is it just after that would be, the building block would be, would it be in-class coaching or one-on-one coaching? How would you look
typically
at that?
there's different models that are out. Well, there's different approaches. There's companies that obviously do the in-class settings where you're actually with a lot of other companies and other individuals from different industries. Then you also have the one-on-one coaching, and then there's also phone support. So I think all of those are the way we shorten the gap of increase the performance and shorten the gap towards that performance level, getting the return on the investment. It has to be the one-on-one situation because you have certain challenges no matter who you are when you engage with an individual. And the idea is to identify how to help you through that is so that you can break through those performance gaps or those performance hindrances that you have.
Indeed. If you say one-on-one, the concern that some of them might always have is that, okay, if it's one-on-one, I can maybe afford, as a company, I can afford to do it for my top management and maybe sales management. But if that is the case, then would you expect a sales manager then to do one-on-one with their individual talents?
I'd say that's the greatest return on the investment then, where you can get a performance coach to work with your sales manager to help them, and again, understand how to coach the staff. I mean, there's can be some broad concepts to understand, but for real transformation, helping that sales manager and how to coach them. And there's models for that. There are models to how you go through that process, how the sales manager would go through that with the individual.
Interesting. So when that happens, so would it mean that when you do it for the first time, so you have a sales manager who's a client for you, and then you go in, you work with him or her, but then you sit down together to see when they coach their people, what they do and how they do it.
Yes. Yes.
And then you tell them where where they could improve, where they're doing a fantastic job.
Yes. So just so to me, so I have clients where actually I am initially conducting kind of the coaching session, and the sales manager's listening.
Yeah.
And then we talk about what did they observe, and then it's kind of like, you know, see one, do one, teach one. So now it's a matter of then they'll do one. They'll engage with and then there's some debrief with the coach after that. But I've seen this typically within about a 90-day to 180-day period. You can see some pretty quick transformation that takes place.
And that would be your justification for why you should be spending on performance coaching.
Yes.
The fact that you see this, and of course it could mean that it's only 180 days, but then in a longer time period they could be doing a lot more as well.
Just so you know, there is statistical data out there that will identify specific hindrances within sales people, that if they are addressed, there is literally a performance growth expectation. So the coach should be able to tell an executive, if we correct this, this is what you should expect from a growth in revenue.
So if, let's say for example, your advice then based on what you just said right now is, if I am a company looking for a coach to come in, and I should be listening for the coach to be saying these kind of things.
Absolutely.
And essentially they should be talking about how, okay, the first thing they say is, I'm going to come and do an assessment of the individuals that need to be coached. I'm going to take an assessment of your situation, how you're working on this. And more importantly, based on this, then I can tell you this could be the potential returns you're going to get.
Exactly.
And this would vary case by case, depending upon the kind of situation. So if I'm looking to hire a performance coach, this is what I should be looking for to show that these are competent people who come in and do it as well.
Yes,
fantastic.
Absolutely.
Now, one of the things we talk about is that, you know, you need to have a strategy, you need to be doing all this, but you hit the nail on the head when you said sometimes you may be working for a publicly listed company where they say 180 days is too much. I work on a quarterly basis. That is, every quarter I have to report my earnings. And if that is the case, what are some quick wins that sales leaders should be expecting?
Good question. Here's what I tell my clients in that, and I think any company that engages any type of performance coach, this is what I do. All my engagements in 90 days because again, it's 30 days to break a bad habit, 30 days to put in a good one, and 30 days to galvanize it. So if you launch an engagement with a performance coach or a sales coach, typically they're going to tell you, you may not necessarily see this type of a results in 90 days numerically, but what they're going to tell you is your sales, because you know what, I feel more confident going into this appointment and more confident where it's going after the appointment. That's the indicator that it's working.
And how would you measure this? Because as you said, are you going to say, before I go in, this is how I'm going to measure the attitude. Let's say, for example, there's not much you can change. It's a long sales cycle. But would you go in and say, here is the baseline, here is where we began with, and let's say 90 days, 90 days or 180 days, depending upon whatever the customer asks you. Is it your responsibility then to go and map it out and say, here is where they began with really low confidence or just average confidence, and in 90, 180 days, hey, the sales cycle is longer than this, so we cannot show you sales returns. But if I can show you that even the attitude of the people is changing, would that be something that you would demonstrate?
Absolutely.
So, and is that your responsibility? Would you be measuring that to show it? Or would an organization say, hey, you know what, we're going to get a third party to come in and say?
No, I think that's a great question, because the way I've always set it up is I've never really told the salesperson, this is what's going to happen to you in 90 days. But I tell the senior level, this is the indicators that you should be looking get. For. Now, the assessment tool is going to tell them where all the gaps in the process are, or gaps in the results. So there's your baseline. But as you progress, then I always have them fill out a lessons learned sheet. Help me know what are you gaining out of this. Give me one little nugget, or give me, and again, the assessment tool is designed to make sure that the person's coachable. So I have engaged in with people that are not coachable, because I don't want to isolate them. But any good coach would not charge a company for someone that's not coachable.
Indeed. But the key thing is, but depending upon the kind of customers, it's your responsibility as a coach to, if you go in externally, is to have that where they are now and where they would like to be, but this is the progress that they're making. Fantastic. Well, the next one, which is actually, I get asked this question a lot, and since you're the expert on this, is to what extent does the coach have to understand what kind of coaching style
That's a great question.
works with that individual that they're trying to coach? So for lack of a better term, say coachee.
Yes, I always like to use sports analogies.
Yeah. Fine.
You know, John Wooden, you know, UCLA basketball coach, I think it's 11, 12, or 13 national championships. I'm sure the UCLA fan will let me know that what the answer is. But he was so good about understanding the individual. And the coach has to modify their personality, their approach to the candidate or to the salesperson in this case, because everybody is different. It is important, but it's incumbent upon the coach to modify their approach to the person.
So essentially what you're saying is a coach is also like a salesperson, because we say a salesperson has to adapt their style according to the style of the person in front of them when they're trying to sell. So
well, I'd say a performance coach is probably more like a counselor, priest, rabbi, minister, you know, because that's the ability to provide a safe space of conversation, but challenging, you know, that they can feel that they can be vulnerable in front of that coach, but yet know that that coach is going to challenge. I call it like tough love. It's tough love with them.
But it's interesting. Have you been in situations where you have shown your vulnerable side as a coach and talk about situations where you had issues? Is that important as well?
Absolutely. No, I think it's incumbent upon that kind of relationship that they recognize, look, you're human too. And from my opinion, the greatest coach is because they've battled through a lot of things. They've worked through and challenged themselves to go through. And frankly, a good coach has their own coach. I have my own coach. And because that's incumbent upon, again, it's about a process of always getting better.
Absolutely. And the idea is that nobody's exactly the best. You can always learn from it. And even you as an individual, even though you're a coach, you also sometimes need help from outside to help you be the best you can.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Now, the next question we have is that, what advice would you give to sales managers about coaching?
Well, I would say, first of all, believe that there is another approach, and that you don't have all the answers. You may be very good at what you do, but you don't have all the answers. Like I said, even some of the greatest of elite athletes have coaches. And their phrase is, I'm a student of my profession and a student of myself. And for that that's very telling to me, that the reason why they achieve that elite status is because they recognize, again, the humility part of them. I don't have all the answers, but I'm competitive enough and desire enough out of myself to get the best out of myself.
It's interesting that I say a lot of, it's interesting, but I think you raise a lot of great points, is when you talk of an athlete has a particular shelf life, for lack of a better word.
Yes.
Right. But a salesperson is going to be in sales, or any other individual for that matter, for a long period of time. So how does coaching change when you have people in different stages in their careers? Can you shed some light on that?
Well, I think that it's always about pursuing excellence. You know, I work with some professional athletes. I have clients that are some very, very well-known professional athletes. But the key that they have is, there's two things. One is the humility that they have. They're driven towards excellence, but they're so humbled as far as where they want to go and who they still believe they can become. But they're also very gracious. They're very gracious for what they have, and they're very gracious for the things that have happened to them to get them to this point of notoriety. So, you know, for a salesperson, there's always more you can give back. There's always more that you can still become, because it doesn't necessarily end with your profession. it transcends your personal life.
Absolutely.
And I see that probably more than anything is how their growth as a professional has helped them grow as a father or a mother with their kids.
Because the humility for me, I think you're absolutely right, because people do not kind of associate salespeople with humility, right? And humility is something, in your opinion, does humility change as a person gains confidence? Because I could be a rookie and be all humble, but then I start hitting my numbers and essentially I start winning, you know, the Salesperson of the Year award, not just for salespeople, it could be any other profession as well, right? And I keep winning all this, and humility might change. So to what extent do you think that the gaps we talked about are going to change as a person progresses in their career?
Great, yes. I believe from my experience, we become more sensitive. Okay, let's say humility. I may believe I'm humble.
Yeah.
But if I'm working on myself, growing, I can look back even 6 months and say, oh my gosh, I can't even believe I thought that or did that or would even attempt to approach something that way, because we have grown. We've learned about ourselves. We learned by self-awareness how we engage in our society, how we engage with our profession, how we engage in our families. So we learn to become a better craftsman with ourselves. And you become more sensitive to the smallest of things, smallest of details, as far as your own personal character elements, so that how that transcends into your communication into the business world. I'm still human.
Indeed. But this is my last question to you on this one, is that the job of the coach then to point out when a person is losing their humility or is changing in not so much of a positive way?
Well, I think that's you know, the incumbent upon the coach to be able to help that person grow into the person that they really truly desire to be. You know, I've had clients that I've actually had to come out and say, look, if you want to hire me, that's your decision, but I will tell you, we are going to have some very direct conversations where I'm going to tell you to shut up, because you need to stop listening to yourself and listen to others. Absolutely. And so, yes, I call it the stick in the cage. The coaches are good about sticking the stick in the cage.
Absolutely. David, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And I think there's a lot we can talk a lot about this, but in the interest of time, I'm sure that we would be glad to have you again on another occasion to come and share your insights. And thank you again for your time as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity.
There it is, folks. We've had David Gorsuch talk about how coaching is important. And I think the parallels that you can have is that salespeople are athletes. They have goals. They want to achieve it. And they're competitive. So that's where you can draw the parallels between athletes and salespeople. But the key aspect for me, the key takeaway, which I think is brilliant, is salespeople need to be humble. And the more you look at it, the more they're coachable as well. So the next webinar is going to be on humility. Stay tuned for that. And thank you for tuning in.